Um, yeah, I attended a Boundless Compassion conference in June over the period of about 5 days. And so we really just immersed ourselves in the energy and the topic of compassion. And they shared first what is compassion, so we kind of knew what was the foundation we were building from. And then we spent the next huge chunk of time on self-compassion, with the knowing that when we go through a really hard time, like Chris said with the song, you know, and one of the things that can help us come out on the other side of that and feel good is to be able to have compassion for ourselves. It helps us to transform. And so today I want to share with you just some of the nuggets from that time. Not nearly as much as I'd like to share with you, but of course that was 5 days and this is maybe 20 minutes. So there's a village involved in this talk too. And I want to read to you first a quote from Christina Feldman's book, which is entitled Compassion, Listening to the Cries of the World. And she says, compassion is being sensitive to the suffering of others and self, with a deep commitment to prevent or relieve the suffering. Compassion speaks of the willingness to engage with tragedy, loss, and pain. It is here that you learn about the depths of tolerance and understanding that are possible for each one of us. It's here that you learn about dignity, meaning, and greatness of heart. And you'll notice in that quote, she doesn't say that engaging with suffering has anything to do with avoiding it or denying it, which is sort of my human ego default position. That's what I want to do. Kind of want to skip over that, pretend it's not there. Just, go under it or around it or talk myself out of it. She also doesn't say that it's setting up camp in the land of suffering. It's the middle path. To hold compassion, to acknowledge suffering, is to open to the transformation of that suffering. I think in unity, sometimes we can misunderstand the teachings, and I know Reverend Cynthia's talked about this before, as have many others, that we can feel shame or like there's something wrong if we have a troubling thing in our life, or if we have, suffering of some kind, if we have, small things we feel bad about, medium-sized, large, extra-large things, a big loss, a tragedy. We can sometimes feel guilty because we do believe that our thoughts have power over our experience, and that's true. And I think sometimes that can be misinterpreted to mean if I was just thinking right, I wouldn't be suffering, right? I have a great Unity friend in Denver, and her husband served on the Unity Village board for many years, and both of them would say that to use that sort of principle of teaching in that way is metaphysical malpractice. Isn't that great? And I think Tom Shepard says that too. He's one of the teachers of the ministers down at Unity Village. So I believe, and I think you do too, that in Unity we can both engage our suffering. Doesn't mean setting up camp in it or denying it. We can engage our suffering. We can honor it. And we can deny its power over us, right? It's not denying the suffering. It's denying the power it has over us. We'll talk more about that. When I was getting ready for this talk, I had already started with my, just notes about which pieces I might want to share. And in the mail came the latest Unity magazine. And in there's an article by Gerald and Diane Jampolsky. Maybe some of you have read it. It's a great article. And they talk about compassion. And I thought, oh, this is good. I'm going to quote them. So here's what I'm quoting from them. I could quote the whole article, but I would like for their voice to be here when they say, our capacity to have compassion for others is a reflection of the compassion that we have for ourselves. It is based on the core essence of who we believe that we are. Our ability to have compassion for ourselves is based on the core essence of who we believe that we are. So if we don't believe, or part of us doesn't believe that we're worthy, we'll probably be denying ourselves self-compassion. Who do we believe we are? What is the core essence of who we believe we are? Well, let's go to Scripture for a moment. 1 Corinthians. Do you not know that you are a sacred temple and the Spirit of God is in you? Do you not know you are a sacred temple and the Spirit of God is in you? We are worthy of compassion. Wayne Dyer, I drew one of his cards when I was beginning this talk too. Before I found out he died, he passed from the earth a week ago. And he left so many rich teachings with us. And these are some of his words. This is the card I drew. The more you extend kindness to yourself, the more it becomes your automatic response to others. I love that. He had a way of distilling things into these beautiful, compact, meaning-filled statements. I have a story about what happens when we try to skip over or deny our suffering. It seems like sort of a silly story, but it really teaches me, and I remember it, and it's my experience. I promised to send a book to someone who wanted a book, and I promised I'd send it on the next day. And so I went to the post office in Urbandale to mail the book, and it was packed. The lobby was packed. It was hot. There was no air moving, which is always an issue for me. I like to have air moving. And there were 2 people working in the windows, and one of the windows, the person was helping a whole family apply for passports. Okay, not a quick process. And the second window was the worker was helping someone mail several packages overseas. Also not a quick process. There were about 20 of us in line. And so I waited about, 10, 15 minutes or something like that, and I found like I was getting kind of grumpy, and like the line did not move. And so I thought, well, I've got other errands to run. I'm just going to go run those, and then I'll come back here after an hour or so and mail the book. So I left and did my thing, and I came back an hour later, and it's kind of the same scenario. The lobby was packed. There was only one person now working in the window because the other person was on break. And, 2 of the people that were like right in front of me when I went the first time were just like 3 or 4 from the front. So there like was movement, but it really wasn't very speedy movement. And so I thought, well, I'm going to wait here and I'm just going to check it out and see, what happens. And so I waited another 10 minutes or so, and, not much was happening. And so I began to just feel myself getting crabby about this. And I'm like, why do they only have so many people working here? And blah, 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 kind of doing my inner rant. And so I thought, well, I'm going to go do some other stuff. And later, I'm going to go to the Clive post office because they're hardly ever busy. So I went and did my thing, and I went to the Clive post office, and I'm telling you, it was packed. And it was hot, and there was no air moving, and it didn't smell very good in there. And there was only one person working behind the window. And I just noticed that I started to just feel really annoyed, kind of ticked off, judgmental. Why do they only have, why does it smell so bad in here? Why don't they have some air conditioning? On and on. And just all of a sudden, thankfully, a couple of things occurred to me. One was, Cindy, you can try to avoid your suffering as much as you want, but like this is the 3rd post office you've been to, and the universe is saying you need to find a way through this because you can't avoid it. And then the second thing that occurred to me was that I was suffering. First I was like, oh, I'm bad, I'm judging these people, I did all that self-shaming blame stuff. But then I paused and I realized, wait a minute, this is suffering for me. Not huge, but suffering, enough to be judgmental. And I just took some deep breaths, although not very deep, because it didn't really smell very good in there. And, and I just, within seconds of breathing a few breaths of self-compassion, I just felt my heart soften and open to myself. And immediately, without even trying to, my heart opened to everyone there. Everyone over at the Urbandale post office who was probably still waiting in line. And I began to just, have compassion for the worker. It probably wasn't her idea of a great day to be the only one working with a lobby full of crabby people. Everybody else waiting in line. And feeling compassion for the person behind me who didn't smell very good. It's like, I don't know what his story is. Really, I don't. Maybe he's homeless. Maybe he doesn't have running water. So I just felt my heart soften and open and hold the whole place in compassion. But I couldn't get there until I acknowledged my own suffering. I tried to go around it. I just ended up in a negative place. And I think that's pretty indicative of what happens when we try to avoid self-compassion. And there are endless opportunities to practice, I find. So compassion is about being aware, being present. You know, I have to be present to notice if I'm suffering. It's about having an attitude where we're willing to have our hearts respond to pain, both ours and others. And Rami Shapiro has a great quote when he says, "Mirror my pain with empathy, but don't take my pain on as your own." So that's a wonderful thing to think about with compassion for others. It doesn't mean we're taking on someone's suffering. Compassion is also about action, taking some movement to alleviate the suffering with understanding rather than judgment. Compassion may not change the troubling thing. The post office was still crowded. Someone else may still have had a great loss that I care about. But compassion can change how we hold the suffering. It can change our relationship to the suffering. We can detach from it. And we don't have to add an extra layer of suffering by trying not to suffer. And it opens the doorway. When I hold myself in compassion, that's a spirit energy, as you know. That opens the doorway to other spirit energy, where the possibilities live, where things that we might not imagine possible can reach us. Compassion is non-judgmental, it's non-violent, not only in our actions, but in our thoughts, with ourselves and with others. It's forgiving, both of others and ourselves. Here's where I omit the things that say omit question because of time. I'd love so much to share many of these things. But so why do we resist self-compassion? You probably have your own sense of that for yourself. Here are some general things. I think we resist self-compassion because we can see it as weakness or softness. We can see it as being prideful. We're taught in the Christian tradition to put other people first. But Jesus did self-care. He showed the importance of self-compassion. He had dinner with friends. He took time alone. He spent time in the garden when he felt vulnerable. He slept in a boat during a storm because he needed to. He asked for a drink. When he was tired, he sat down by the well. He allowed himself to be anointed. He allowed himself to feel and cry when his friend Lazarus died. He went out on a boat far from the shore to be alone. Jesus showed us the importance of self-compassion. Sometimes I think if we feel unworthy of compassion or a part of us, most of us knows that we're Christ-light and we're good and whole just as we are, but we can have an ego part that forgets that. And I think that part can sort of armor us against compassion and against softening. There's a great story in Jack Kornfield's book, The Wise Heart, about a Buddha statue that was apparently quite honored in its location, and that people would travel for miles around to meditate in the presence of this huge statue of the Buddha. And then what happened was there was, I think, an earthquake or something. I don't remember for sure what the details were, but the statue cracked. And everyone was very, upset about that because it was a revered statue and, a revered place of connecting with the higher perspective of Buddha energy. And someone had the presence, they were present and aware enough to look inside the cracks. And what they found inside this shell of concrete was a golden, solid gold statue of the Buddha. I think we do that sometimes. We armor ourselves. We think we're protecting ourselves, right? But what we're really doing is hiding the gold that we are, that we can offer to the world. Black Elk, who was a Native American wise man, spoke of seeing in a sacred manner. Seeing in a sacred manner. It reminds me of those old books that some of you might be too young to remember, but I'm hoping some of you do. They were called Miracle Eyes or Stereos a few years ago, where you would open the book and it was just page after page of these patterns that were supposed to have images in them. But the harder you looked, some of you are nodding, thank you, the harder you looked at those, the less you could find the images. Only when you softened your gaze could you see the images rise up off the page. Only in softening do things come into focus for us. Being soft opens us to the possibilities. And again, it's the doorway to opening to the power of spirit when we soften, rather than try to hold ourselves tight, which we all do sometimes, of course, and then we can be compassionate about that. Sometimes we resist compassion because we believe that it's selfish. In our Elizabeth Gilbert shared this when she was promoting her book, Eat, Pray, Love. She said that somebody asked her that question, isn't it selfish of you that you quit your job, left your family, and spent all this money traveling to all these countries to find yourself? Like that was a bad thing. And she wasn't the least bit defensive, and she just said, it's interesting because in our culture, you look up the definition of selfish, and it's to care for self at the expense of others. But in Bali and many other Eastern cultures, their word for selfish is defined as care for self so that we can then care for others. Kristen Neff, N-E-F-F, has a great website. It's self-compassion.org, and I would invite you to visit that if you have any interest in this topic at all. On there, she gives a lot of information about the power of self-compassion. She has several audio meditations that are about compassion for self, and she talks about what self-compassion is not. Self-compassion is not self-pity, it's not self-indulgence, it's not self-esteem, and she elaborates about all of that on her website. I wanted to mention oxytocin. That is a hormone of love and bonding that is actually, apparently, I'm told, very high during times of pregnancy for women. And so on her website, she offers meditations, and she talks about the science of compassion. We can engage the energy of oxytocin in our own body by our physical touch. And so that's why I offered this morning the meditation that I did. That is a variation of one of her meditations about how we can access our own oxytocin through the power of our touch. It's powerful. So, our daily practice is one way that we can bring self-compassion in. And I want to say that compassion is not about results. It's like, well, I did that exercise and it didn't make that go away. We're in such an efficiency society, and compassion is really more about a love society. It's not about results, but it does hold the power of transformation. So, some of the summary points of what I wanted to share with you today. Compassion is being present and aware of what's troubling us, being aware of our pain, being willing to be with it, to engage it, while neither denying it nor setting up our campsite in the land of suffering. We, of course, don't want to do that either. Having suffering or something troubling us is not failing. It means we're living a fully engaged life. Self-compassion is about tending the suffering in a way that can transform it, can widen our perspective about it, can help us detach from a hyper-focus on it. Self-compassion allows us to be more compassionate with others, also with marginalized populations, and also with Earth. Yeah, exclamation point. Jesus lived in a way that showed the importance of self-compassion. Living a life of compassion is a choice that we make every day. I want you to have a takeaway today in the form of a loving kindness blessing. And you should have gotten a handout when you came with the words on it. And Chris, I think, is also going to put it up on the screen for us. And Christy has some extras. If you didn't get one, you can raise your hand and she'll get one to you to take home if you like. A loving kindness blessing generally is thought to come from Eastern traditions, and you'll see lots of different variations around. And they're usually, this is a variation of one I learned in Omaha. The phrases usually start with may I. I've changed the language a little bit to be more in alignment with unity affirmation words today, but you can do it either way for yourself, or you could experiment in what is the best way for you. When I came home with this loving kindness blessing that I was saying a lot, I do it every morning now as part of my daily practice, and bless her heart, Morgan set it to music. And so she's going to teach us the chant, and together with the Unity Band, we'll do this for our offertory music in a minute. But she'll teach us first about the chant. I want to tell you what the words are, and you have them, and you can see them too. The first stanza, there are 3 stanzas. The first one is, I abide in loving kindness. And so it really is setting up the frame of saying, I make my home in loving kindness. And then it says, I am free from suffering, which acknowledges suffering and our desire to be free from that. I receive what I need, moving into the transformation, and I am at peace. And then we say that same blessing. We say it 3 times for ourselves. That's the tradition. And then we bring someone to mind that we love and care about. And we can say that, sing that blessing to that loved one today, too. And you can do it after today, of course. And then we sing it for all beings. And so I think we're ready for you to teach us. The Morgan and the Unity Band helping us just first to learn it, and then we'll do our offertory collection.